Going on, everybody? Welcome. Episode 38 of Relax and Read. Nat Gooch, Caradox Rift, how you doing? New Zealand fam, I hope you're doing well. I got to chapter 5. Yeah, work was really busy today too. So, as you can see, just kind of came right on over and sat down. Hope you're doing all right. Let's go ahead and get this part started. There's 6 views already. How was everybody's Monday? Is everybody excited about this as I am? Raphilosophy, how's it going, fam? It's good to see you, brother. Yippee! I'm sporting a killing headache. No! That's quite alright, Mr. Gooch. Totally understandable. That was me on Monday. I just had a headache that I couldn't seem to shake. But no worries at all, man. You head out when you need to. Appreciate you being here. Get started right around the 10-minute mark as always. Make sure everybody can get in, get comfy, get a drink. And we're going to solve this. Let's wait until that hits 30 so we can time ourselves here. Layla tonight? Yeah, no worries. I know they're not feeling too well. Want to be in bed by 11. That's a good goal. Oh, thank you. I get so lost in the scramble. It's a good fidgeter. All right, here we go. But yes, welcome in everybody. Hope everybody had a great Monday. Red side in there. Moves to usual Monday. Chasing the DP. Oh, I got you. Hello, Kevin, fellow ghosties. What's up, Brangus? I hope you're doing well tonight. Yeah, so many people on tonight. That's probably the why I didn't even think about that, but I did have that thought today. Like as I was gearing up to get ready to read, I was like, man, everybody's popping up today. But as you all know, I don't do streaming Monday for that. If I did, we would do reading another night, but tonight is for all of you, so that we can all relax after a busy Monday and just be with one another and not have to be wrapped up in the struggle and the chaos of the world around us, and escape and, in fact, go to another world, which is Mars. And I'm really enjoying this series, so I'm glad to hear that a lot of you are as well. Nana, Staples, aw. It's Tuesday for us. Like, in a good way they came out. It's really good to see you, Layla. I hope you're doing well. There we go. Free pair. There we go. It's all reduced. Now we solve. Heavy D, hope you're doing well. Nice, sir. Nurse took him out today. Excellent. That is really, really good to hear. I hope that she heals up nicely. One more. Should prove done. Everyone's doing the same, doing really well. Hope Layton's taking plenty of fluids. I agree. 100%. Doing Monday stream, looking forward to the next series. I am too. This one's called The Gods of Mars. For doing Monday stream, I appreciate you. I will never change on Monday. This is what I will always do. All right, where are we at? Right about the 8-minute mark. So in that couple of minutes while we're waiting, did want to say that if you ever wanted to try out multiple cubes, but you didn't want to go out and like purchase one of every cube like my silly self, you can always, of course, start with the 3x3, but the 4x4 I found today very unique because you can solve it like a 4x4 as I did. But if you never move your second layer, if you only turn the outsides, you can turn this into a 3x3 and practice the 3x3 before conquering the 4x4. You just have to take these two pieces and always keep them together. And those are kind of like your side pieces there. And you can just spend the time and learn how to solve the 3x3. But the really unique part of the 4x4 is that I noticed you can also turn it into a 2x2 if you wanted to, a very expensive 2x2. And you'll never get the parodies that you would get with a 4x4 either at the end, because you're never having to rearrange your centers at all. So the cube should just always be ready to go back to the solved state. And figured since we had a couple of minutes, I would do a quick 3x3 solve. And then if you ever just take your 4x4 and turn it like this, there's your 2x2. So thought that was pretty unique. Issues, Kev, I would geek out about these keys. Oh man, I would absolutely love that. Always used for flu when we catch it. Excellent. That is great. And there we go. That took us, well, just over 10, but 10 it is. Have a few of you in here ready to go as always. And I appreciate you guys spending your Monday night with me. We're going to jump in and do the first 7 chapters of The Gods of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs, which is the second story in the John Carter series. Just give me a half a second to get that pulled up, and then we're going to jump right into it head first. All right, as is courtesy, we should read the foreword to the book written by Edgar Rice Burroughs. And grab a warm drink, yep, that's exactly what it's for. All right, the foreword. 12 years had passed since I had laid the body of my great uncle, Captain John Carter of Virginia, away from the sight of men in that strange mausoleum in the old cemetery in Richmond. Often I had pondered on the odd instructions he had left me governing the construction of his mighty tomb, and especially those parts which directed that he be laid in an open casket, and that the ponderous mechanism which controlled the bolts of the vault's huge door be accessible only from the inside. 12 years had passed since I read the remarkable manuscript of this remarkable man, this man who could remember no childhood, and who could not even offer a vague guess as to his age, who was always young, and yet who had dandled my grandfather's great-grandfather upon his knee. This man, who had spent 10 years upon the planet Mars, who had fought for the green men of Barsoom and fought against them, who had fought for and against the red men, and who had won the ever-beautiful Dejah Thoris, Princess of Helium, for his wife, and for nearly 10 years had been a prince of the house of Tardos Mors, Jeddak of Helium. 12 years had passed since his body had been found upon the bluff before his cottage overlooking the Hudson, and oft-times during these long years I wondered if John Carter were really dead, or if he again roamed to the Dead Sea bottoms of that dying planet. If he had returned to the Barsoom, to find that he had opened the frowning portals of the mighty atmosphere plant in time to save the countless millions who were dying of asphyxiation on that far-gone day that had seen him hurtled ruthlessly through 48 million miles of space back to Earth once more. I had wondered if he had found his black-haired princess on the slender sun, and the slender son he had dreamed was with her in the royal gardens of Tardos Mors, awaiting his return, or had he found that he had been too late, and thus gone back to a living death upon the dead world, or was he really dead after all, never to return either to this Mother Earth or his beloved Mars? Thus was I lost in useless speculation one sultry August evening, when old Ben, my body servant, handed me a telegram. Tearing it open, it read, "Meet me tomorrow, Hotel Raleigh, Raleigh, Richmond, John Carter." Early the next morning I took the first train for Richmond, and within 2 hours I was being ushered into the room occupied by John Carter. As I entered he rose to greet me, his old-time cordial smile of welcome lighting his handsome face. Apparently he had not aged a minute, but was still in straight, clean-limbed fighting man of 30. His keen gray eyes were undimmed, and the only lines upon his face were the lines of iron character and determination that always had been there since I first remembered him, nearly 35 years before. "Well, nephew," he greeted me, "do you feel as though you were seeing a ghost, or suffering from the effects of too many of Uncle Ben's juleps?" "Juleps, I reckon," I replied, for I certainly feel mighty good, but maybe it's just the sight of you again that affects me. You have been back to Mars? Tell me. And Dejah Thoris, you found her well and awaiting you?" "Yes." I have been to Barsoom again, but it's a long story, too long to tell in the limited time I have before I must return. I have learned the secret, nephew, and I may traverse the trackless void at my will, coming and going between the countless planets as I list. But my heart is always in Barsoom, and while it is there that the keeping of my Martian princess, I doubt that I shall ever again leave the dying world that is my life. And I have come now because my affection for you prompted me to see you once more before you pass over for ever into the other life that I shall never know. I which though I had died thrice and shall die again tonight, as you know death, I am unable to fathom as you are. Even the wise and mysterious Therns of Barsoom, that ancient cult which for countless ages have been credited with holding the secret of life and death in their impregnable fastness upon the hither slopes of the mountains of Otz, they're as ignorant as we. I have proved it, though I near lost my life in doing it, but you shall read it all in the notes I have been making during the last 3 months that I have been back on Earth. He patted a swelling portfolio that lay on the table at his elbow. I know that you are interested and that you believe, and I know that the world, too, is interested. Though they will not believe for many years, yes, for many ages, since they cannot understand. Earthmen have not yet progressed to the point where they can comprehend the things that I have written in those notes. Give them what you wish of it. What you think will not harm them, but do not feel aggrieved if they laugh at you. That night I walked down to the cemetery with him. At the door of his vault he turned and pressed my hand. "Goodbye, nephew," he said. "I may never see you again, for I doubt that I can ever bring myself to leave my wife and boy while they live. And the span of a life upon Barsoom is often more than 1,000 years." He entered the vault. The great door swung slowly to. The ponderous bolts grated into place. The lock clicked. I have never seen Captain John Carter of Virginia since. But here is the story of his return to Mars on that other occasion, as I have gleaned it from the great mass of notes which he left for me upon the table of his room in the hotel in Richmond. There is much which I have left out, much which I have not dared to tell, but you will find the story of this second search for Dejah Thoris, Princess of Helium, even more remarkable than was his first manuscript, which I give to an unbelieving world a short time since, and through which we followed the Fighting Virginian across Dead Sea bottoms under the moons of Mars. Edgar Rice Burroughs. Hey, Beef Burger, how's it going? Off to lurk, I'll be around. Appreciate you, Kara. Appreciate you. I hope you're doing well tonight, Beef. We just read the foreword of the book we are about to read, the first 7 chapters of, which is The Gods of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs. I really like the foreword, how John Carter is his uncle. That was a great way. Plus, I'm happy he made it back. All right. Here we go, y'all. Once again, thank you all so much for being here and enjoying your Monday with me. We're going to get into chapter 1, which is The Plant Men. As I stood upon the bluff before my cottage on that clear cold night in the early part of March, 1886, the noble Hudson flowing like the gray and silent specter of a dead river below me, I felt again the strange, compelling influence of the mighty god of war, my beloved Mars, which for 10 long and lonesome years I had implored with outstretched arms to carry me back to my lost love. Not since that other March night in 1866, when I had stood without that Arizona cave in which my still and lifeless body lay wrapped in the similitude of earthly death, had I felt the irresistible attraction of the god of my profession. With arms outstretched towards the red eye of the great star, I stood praying for a return of that strange power which twice had drawn me through the immensity of space, praying as I had prayed on 1,000 nights before during the long 10 years that I had waited and hoped. Suddenly a qualm of nausea swept over me. My senses swarmed, my knees gave beneath me, and I pitched headlong to the ground upon the very verge of the dizzying bluff. Instantly my brain cleared, and there swept back across the threshold of my memory vivid pictures of the horrors of that ghostly Arizona cave. Again, as on that far-gone night, my muscles refused to respond to my will, and again, as though even here upon the banks of this place, the placid Hudson, I could hear the awful moans and rustling of the fearsome thing which had lurked and threatened me from the dark recesses of the cave. I made the same mighty and superhuman effort to break the bonds of the strange anesthesia which held me, and again came a sharp click as if a sudden parting of a taut wire, and I stood, naked and free, beside the staring, lifeless thing that had so recently pulsed with warm, red blood of John Carter. With scarcely a parting glance, I turned my eyes again towards Mars, lifted my hands towards the lurid rays, and waited. Nor did I have long to wait, for scarce had I turned ere I shot with a rapidity and thought into the awful void before me. There was the same instant of unthinkable cold and utter darkness that I experienced 20 years before, and then I opened my eyes in another world, beneath the burning rays of the hot sun, which beat through the tiny openings in the dome of the mighty forest in which I lay. The scene that met my eyes was so un-Martian that my heart sprang to my throat as a sudden fear swept through me that I had been aimlessly tossed upon some strange planet by cruel fate. Why not? What guide had I through the tactless waste of interplanetary space? What assurance that I might not as well be hurtled to some far distant star of another solar system as to Mars? I lay upon the close-cropped sward of red grass-like vegetation, and about me stretched a grove of strange and beautiful trees, covered with huge and gorgeous blossoms that filled with brilliant, voiceless birds. I call them birds since they were winged, but mortal eyes ne'er rested on such odd, unearthly shapes. The vegetation was similar to that which covers the lawns of the red Martians of the great waterways, but the trees and birds were unlike anything that I had ever seen upon Mars. And then, through the further trees, I could see the most un-Martian of all sights, an open sea, its blue water shimmering beneath the brazen sun. As I rose to investigate further, I experienced the same ridiculous catastrophe that had met my first attempt to walk under Martian conditions. The lesser attraction of this smaller planet and the reduced air pressure of its greatly rarefied atmosphere afforded so little resistance to my earthly muscles that the ordinary exertion of a mere act of rising sent me several feet into the air and precipitated me upon my face in the soft brilliance of the grass of the strange world. This experience, however, gave me some slight increased assurance that, after all, I might indeed be in some, to me, unknown corner of Mars. And this was very possible, since during my 10 years' residence upon the planet I had explored but a comparatively tiny area of this vast expanse. I arose again, laughing at my forgetfulness, and soon I had mastered once more the art of attuning my earthly sinews to these changed conditions. As I walked slowly down the imperceptible slope toward the sea, I could not help but note the park-like appearance of the sward of trees, and the grass was as close-cropped and carpet-like as some old English lawn, and the trees themselves showed evidence of careful pruning to the uniform height of about 15 feet from the ground, so that as one turned its glance in any direction, the forest had the appearance at a little distance of a vast high-ceilinged chamber. All these evidences of careful and symmetrical cultivation convinced me that I had been fortunate enough to make my entry into Mars on this second occasion through the domain of civilized people, and that when I should find them, I would be accorded in courtesy and protection that my rank as the Prince of the House of Tardos Morse entitled me. The trees of the forest attracted my deep admiration as I proceeded towards the sea. Their great stems, some of them fully 100 feet in diameter, attested their prodigious height, which I could only guess at, since at no point could I penetrate their dense foliage above me to more than 60 or 80 feet. As far aloft as I could see, the stems and the branches and twigs were as smooth and as highly polished as the newest of American-made pianos. The wood of some of the trees was as black as ebony, while their nearest neighbors might perhaps gleam in the subdued light of the forest as clear as white, as the finest china, or again they were azure, scarlet, yellow, or deepest purple. And in the same way as the foliage, as gay and variegated as the stems were, the blooms that clustered thick upon them may not be described as in any earthly tongue, and indeed might challenge the language of the gods. As I neared the confines of the forest, I beheld before me, and between the grove and the open sea, a broad expanse of meadowland. And as I was about to emerge from the shadows of the trees, a sight met my eyes that banished all romantic and poetic reflection upon the beauties of the strange landscape. To my excuse me. To my left, the sea extended as far as the eye could reach. Before me, only a vague dim line indicated its further shore, while at my right a mighty river, broad, placid, and majestic, flowed between the scarlet banks to empty into the quiet sea before me. At a little distance up the river rose a mighty perpendicular bluff, from the very base of which the great river seemed to rise. But it was not these inspiring and magnificent evidences of nature's grandeur that took my immediate attention away from the beauties of the forest. It was the sight of the score of figures moving slowly about the meadow near the bank of the mighty river. Odd, grotesque shapes they were, unlike anything I had ever seen upon Mars, and yet, at a distance, most manlike in appearance. The larger specimens appeared to be about 10 or 12 feet in height when they stood erect, and to be proportioned as to torso and lower extremities precisely as an earthly man. Their arms, however, were very short, and from where I stood it seemed as though fashioned much after the manner of an elephant's trunk, in that they moved in sinuous and snake-like undulations, as though entirely without bony structure, or if there were bones, it seemed that they must have been vertebral in nature. As I watched them from behind the stem of a huge tree, one of the creatures moved slowly in my direction, engaged in the occupation that seemed to be the principal business of each of them, and which consisted in running their oddly shaped hands over the surface of the sward, and for what purpose I could not determine. As he approached quite close to me, I obtained an excellent view of him, and though I was later to become better acquainted with his kind, I may say that the single cursory examination of this awful travesty on nature would not prove quite sufficient to my desires had I been a free agent. The faster flyer of the heliumic navy could not quickly enough have carried me far beyond this hideous creature. Its hairless body was a strange and ghoulish blue, except for a broad band of white which encircled its protruding single eye, an eye that was all dead white, pupils, iris, and ball. Its nose was ragged, inflamed, circular hole in the center of its blank face, a hole that resembled more closely nothing than I could think of other than a fresh bullet wound which had not yet commenced to bleed. Below this repulsive orifice, the face was quite blank to the chin, for the thing had no mouth that I could discover. The head, with the exception of the face, was covered with a tangled mass of jet black hair, some 8 or 10 inches in length. Each hair was about the bigness of a large angleworm, and as the thing moved, the muscles of its scalp and its awful head covering seemed to writhe and wriggle and crawl about the fearsome face, as though indeed each separate hair was endowed with an independent life. The body and legs were as symmetrically human as nature could have fashioned them, and the feet, too, were human in shape, but of monstrous proportions. From heel to toe, they were fully 3 feet long, and very flat and very broad. As it came quite close to me, I discovered that its strange movements, running its odd hands over the surface of the turf, were the result of its particular method of feeding, which consists of cropping off the tender vegetation with its razor-like talons and sucking it up from its 2 mouths, which lie in the palm of each hand, through its arm-like throats. In addition to the features which I have already described, the beast was equipped with a massive tail of about 6 feet in length, quite round where it joined to the body, but tapering to a flat, thin blade towards the end, which trailed at right angles to the ground. By far more remarkable feature of this most remarkable creature, however, were the 2 tiny replicas of it, each about 6 inches in length, each dangled, one on either side, from its armpits. They were suspended by a small stem which seemed to grow from the exact tops of their heads to where it connected them to the body of the adult. Whether they were the young or merely portions of a composite creature, I don't know. As I had been scrutinizing this weird monstrosity, the balance of the herd had fed quite close to me, and now saw that while many of the smaller specimens dangling from them, not all were thus equipped, and I further noted that the little ones varied in size from what appeared to be tiny unopened buds an inch in diameter through various stages of development to a full-fledged and perfectly formed creature of 10 to 12 inches in length. Feeding with the herd were many of those little fellows not much larger than those which remained attached to their parents, and from the young of that size the herd graded up to the immense adults. Fearsome looking as they were, I did not know whether to fear them or not, for they did not seem to be particularly well equipped for fighting, and I was on the point of stepping from my hiding place and revealing myself to them to note the effect upon them of the sight of a man, when my rash resolve was, fortunately for me, nipped in the bud by a strange, shrieking wail, which seemed to come from the direction of the bluffs at my right. Naked and unarmed as I was, my end would have been both speedy and horrible at the hands of these cruel creatures had I time to put my resolve into execution. But at the moment of the shriek, each member of the herd turned in the direction from which the sound seemed to come, and at the same instant every particular snake-like hair upon their heads rose stiffly perpendicular, as if each had been a sentient organism looking or listening for the source of meaning of the wail. And indeed the latter proved to be the truth, for this strange growth upon the craniums of the plant men of Barsoom represented 1,000 ears of these hideous creatures, and the last remnant of the strange race which sprang from the original tree of life. Instantly every eye turned toward one of the members of the herd, a large fellow who evidently was the leader. A strange purring sound issued from the mouth in the palm of one of his hands, and at the same time he started rapidly toward the bluff, followed by the entire herd. Their speed and method of locomotion were both remarkable, springing as they did in great leaps of 20 or 30 feet, much after the manner of a kangaroo. They were rapidly disappearing when it occurred to me to follow them, and so, hurling caution to the winds, I sprang across the meadows in their wake with leaps and bounds even more prodigious than their own, for the muscles of the athletic Earthman produce remarkable results when pitted against the lesser gravity and air pressure of Mars. Their way led directly toward the apparent source of the river at the base of the cliffs, and as I neared this point I found the meadow dotted with huge boulders that the ravages of time have evidently dislodged from the towering crags above. For this reason I came quite close to the cause of the disturbance before the scene broke upon my horrified gaze. As I topped a great boulder, I saw a herd of plant men surrounding a little group of perhaps 5 or 6 green men and women of Barsoom. That I was indeed upon Mars I now had no doubt, for here were members of the wild hordes that people the dead sea bottoms and the deserted cities of the dying planet. Here were the great males towering in all their majesty of their imposing height. Here were the gleaming white tusks protruding from their massive lower jaws to the point near the center of their foreheads, the laterally placed protruding eyes with which they could look forward or backward, or to either side without turning their heads. Here the strange antenna-like ears rising from the tops of their foreheads, and the additional pair of arms extending from midway between their shoulders and their hips. Even without the glossy green hide and the metal ornaments which denoted the tribes from which they belonged, I would have known them on an instant for what they were. For where else in the universe are they like duplicated? There were 2 men and 4 females in the party, and their ornaments denoted them as members of different hordes, a fact which tended to puzzle me infinitely, since the various hordes of green men of Barsoom are eternally and deadly at war with one another, and never, except on a single historic instance when the great Tars Tarkas of Thark gathered 150,000 green warriors from several hordes to march upon the doomed city of Zodanga to rescue Deja Thoris, Princess of Helium, from the clutches of Thankosis. Had I seen green Martians of different hordes associated in other than mortal combat. But now they stood back to back, facing the wide-eyed amazement, the very evidently hostile demonstrations of a common enemy. Both men and women were armed with long swords and daggers, but no firearms were in evidence. Else it would have been a short shrift from the gruesome planet a short shrift for the gruesome plant men of Barsoom. Presently, the leader of the plant men charged the little party, and his method of attack was as remarkable as it was effective, and by its very strangeness was the more potent, since in the science of the Green Warriors there was no defense for a single manner of attack, the like of which it soon was evident to me they were as unfamiliar with as they were with the monstrosities which confronted them. The plant men charged to within a dozen feet of the party, and then, with a bound, rose as though to pass directly above their heads. His powerful tail was raised high to one side, and as he passed close above them, he brought it down in one terrific sweep. Excuse me. That came out of nowhere. That crushed the Green Warrior's skull as though he had been in an eggshell. The balance of the faithful herd was now circling rapidly and with bewildering speed about the little knots of victims, their prodigious bounds and the shrill, shrieking purr of their uncanny mouths were well calculated to confuse and terrorize their prey, so that, as two of them leapt simultaneously from either side, a mighty sweep of those awful tails met with no resistance, and two more green Martians went down to an ignoble death. There were now but one warrior and two females left, and it seemed like it could be a matter of seconds ere these also lay dead upon the scarlet sword. But as two more of the plant men charged, the warrior, who was now prepared by the experiences of the past few minutes, swung his mighty long sword aloft and met the hurtling bulk with the clean cut that clove one of the plant men from chin to groin. The other, however, dealt a single blow with his cruel tail and laid both of the females' crushed corpses upon the ground. As the Green Warrior saw the last of his companions go down, and at the same time perceived that the entire herd was charging him in a body, he rushed boldly to meet them, swinging his long sword in a terrific manner that I had so often seen the men of his kind wield it in their ferocious and almost continual warfare among their own races. Cutting and hewing to right to left, he laid an open path straight through the advancing plant men, and then commenced a mad race for the forest, in the shelter of which he evidently hoped that he might find a haven of refuge. He had turned for that portion of the forest which abutted on a cliffs, and thus a mad race was taking an entire party farther and further from the boulder where I lay concealed. As I had watched the noble fight which the great warrior had put up against such an enormous odds, my heart had swelled in admiration for him, and acting as I am wont to do more upon impulse than after mature deliberation, I instantly sprang from my sheltering rock and bounded quickly towards the bodies of the dead green Martians, a well-defined plan of action already formed. Half a dozen great leaps brought me to the spot, and another instant saw me again in my stride in quick pursuit of the hideous monsters that were rapidly gaining on the fleeing warrior. But this time I grasped a mighty long sword in my hand, and in my heart was an odd bloodlust of the fighting man, and the red mist swarmed before my eyes, and I felt my lips respond to my heart in the old smile that has ever marked me in the midst of the joy of battle. Swift as I was none too soon, for the Green Warrior had been overtaken ere he had made half the distance to the forest, and now he stood with his back to a boulder, while the herd temporarily balked, hissed, and screeched about him. With their single eyes in the center of their heads, and every eye turned upon their prey, they did not note my soundless approach, so that I was upon them with my great long sword, and four of them lay dead ere they knew what I was among them. For an instant they recoiled before my terrific onslaught, and in that instant the Green Warrior rose to the occasion, and springing to my side, laid to the right and the left of him as I had never seen but one other warrior do. With great circling strokes it formed a figure 8 about him, and that never stopped until none stood living to oppose him. His keen blade passed through the flesh and bone and metal as though it had been alike thin air. As we bent to the slaughter, far above us rose that shrill, weird cry which I had heard once before, and which had called the herd to the attack upon their victims. Again and again it rose, but we were much too engaged with the fierce and powerful creatures about us to attempt to search out, even with our eyes, the author of this horrid notes. Great tails lashed in frenzied anger about us, razor-like talons cut our limbs and bodies, and a green and sticky syrup such as oozes from the crushed caterpillar smeared from head to foot. For every cut and thrust of our long swords brought spurts of this stuff upon us from severed arteries of the plant men, through which it courses in its sluggish viscidity of in lieu of blood. Once I felt the great weight of one of the monsters upon my back, and as keen talons sunk into my flesh, I experienced a frightful sensation of moist lips sucking the lifeblood from the wounds at which the claws still clung. I was very much engaged with the ferocious fellow who was endeavoring to reach my throat from the front, while two more, one on either side, were lashing viciously at me with their tails. The green warrior was much put to it to hold his own, and I felt that the unequal struggle could last but a moment longer when a huge fellow discovered my plight, and tearing himself from those that surrounded him, he raked the assailant from my back with a single sweep of his blade, and thus relieved that I had little difficulty with the others. Once together, we stood almost back to back against the great boulder, and thus the creatures were prevented from soaring above us to deliver their deathly blows. And as we were easily their match while they remained upon the ground, we were making great headway in dispatching what remained of them when our attention was again attracted by the shrill wail of the caller above our heads. This time I glanced up, and far above us, upon a little natural balcony on the face of the cliff, stood a strange figure, a man shrieking out his shrill signal. The while he waved one hand in the direction of the river's mouth, as though beckoning to someone there, and with the other pointed and gesticulated towards us. A glance in the direction towards which he was looking was sufficient to appease me of his aims, and at the same time to fill me with the dread of dire apprehension, for streaming in from all directions across the meadow, from out of the forest, and from the far distance of the flat land across the river, I could see converging upon us 100 different lines of wildly leaping creatures such as we were now engaged with, and with them were some strange new monsters which ran with great swiftness, now erect and now upon all fours. "It will be a great death," I said to my companion. "Look." As he shot a quick glance in the direction I indicated, he smiled. "We may at least die fighting as great warriors should, John Carter," he replied. We had just finished the last of our immediate antagonists as he spoke, and I turned in surprised wonderment at the sound of my name. And there, before my astonished eyes, I beheld the greatest of the green men of Barsoom, the shrewdest statesman, their mightiest general, my great and good friend, Tars Tarkas, Jeddak of Thark. Hello. It's good to see you. Sable. It's good to see you. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody's doing well. Well, the first one's always the roughest. Noticed it always takes a second for my eyes to get accustomed to the screen. But it is good to see you all. Met back up with Tars Tarkas. This is gonna get good. Chapter 2. A Forest Battle. Tars Tarkas and I found no time for an exchange of experiences as we stood there before the great boulder surrounded by the corpses of our grotesque assailants. For from all directions down the broad valley was streaming the perfect torrent of terrifying creatures in response to the weird call of the strange figure far above us. "Come," cried Tars Tarkas, "we must make for the cliffs. There lies our only hope of even temporary escape. There we may find a cave or a narrow ledge, which too may defend forever against this monstrosity unarmed horde." Together we raced across the scarlet sward, I timing my speed that I might not outdistance my slower companion. We had perhaps 300 yards to cover between our boulder and the cliffs, and then to search out a suitable shelter for our stand against the terrifying things that were pursuing us. They were rapidly overhauling us when Tars Tarkas cried to me to hasten ahead and discover, if possible, the sanctuary we sought. The suggestion was a good one, for thus many valuable minutes might be saved to us, and throwing every ounce of my earthly muscles into the effort, I cleared the remaining distance between myself and the cliffs in great leaps and bounds that put me at the base of the mount in a moment. The cliffs rose perpendicular directly from the almost level sward of the valley. There was no accumulation of fallen debris, forming a more or less rough ascent for them, as is the case with nearly all other cliffs I've ever seen. The scattered boulders that had fallen from above and lay upon or partly buried in the turf were the only indication that any disintegration of the massive towering pile of rocks had ever taken place. My first cursory inspection of the face of the cliffs filled my heart with forebodings, since nowhere I could discern, except where the weird herald stood, still shrieking his shrill summons, the faintest indication of even a barefooted hold upon the lofty escarpment. To my right, the bottom of the cliff was lost in the dense foliage of the forest, which terminated at its very foot, rearing its gorgeous foliage fully 1,000 feet against its stern and forbidding neighbor. To the left, the cliff ran apparently unbroken across the head of a broad valley, to be lost in the outlines of what appeared to be a range of mighty mountains that skirted and confined the valley in every direction. Perhaps 1,000 feet from me, the river broke, as it seemed, directly from the base of the cliffs, and as there seemed not the remotest chance for escape in their direction, I turned my attention again toward the forest. The cliffs towered above me a good 5,000 feet. The sun was not quite upon them, and they loomed a dull yellow in their own shade. Here and there they were broken with streaks and patches of dusky red and green, and occasional areas of white quartz. Altogether, they were very beautiful, but I fear that I did not regard them with a particularly appreciative eye on this, my first inspection of them. Just then, I was absorbed in them only as a medium of escape, and so, as my gaze ran quickly, time and again over the vast expanse in search of some cranny or crevice, I came suddenly to loathe them as the prisoner must loathe the cruel and impregnable walls of his dungeon. Tars Tarkas was approaching me rapidly, and still more rapidly came the awful horde at its heels. It seemed the forest now or nothing, and I was just on the point of motioning Tars Tarkas to follow me in that direction when the sun passed the cliff's zenith, and as bright rays touched the dull surface, it burst out into a million scintillating lights of burnished gold, of flaming red, of soft greens and gleaming whites. The more gorgeous and inspiring spectacle human eye has never rested upon. The face of the entire cliff was, as later inspection conclusively proved, so shot with veins and patches of solid gold as to quite present the appearance of solid wall of the precious metal, except where it was broken by outcroppings of rubies, emeralds, and diamond boulders. A faint and alluring indication of the vast and unguessable riches which lay deeply buried beneath the magnificent surface. But what caught my most interested attention at the moment that the sun's rays set the cliff's face a-shimmer was that several black spots which now appeared quite plainly in evidence high across the gorgeous wall close to the forest top, and extending apparently below and behind the branches. Almost immediately I recognized them for what they were, the dark openings of the caves entering the solid walls, possible avenues of escape or temporary shelter could we but reach them. There was a single way, and that led through the mighty towering trees upon our right. That I could scale them I knew full well, but Tars Tarkas, with his mighty bulk and enormous weight, would find the task possibly quite beyond his prowess or his skill, for Martians are at best but poor climbers. Upon the entire surface of that ancient planet, I never before had seen a hill or mountain that exceeded 4,000 feet in height above the Dead Sea bottoms, and as the ascent was usually gradual, nearly to their summits they presented but few opportunities for the practice of climbing. Nor would the Martians have embraced even such opportunities as might present themselves, for they could always find the cir- mm, cir- circuitous route Never read that word. About the base of any eminence, and these roads they preferred and followed in preference to the shorter but more arduous ways. However, there was nothing else to consider than an attempt to scale the trees contiguous to the cliffs in the effort to reach the caves above. The Thark grasped the possibilities and difficulties of the plan at once, but there was no alternative, and so we set out rapidly for the trees nearest the cliff. Our relentless pursuers were now close to us, so close that it seemed that it would be an utter impossibility for the Jeddak of Thark to reach the forest in advance of them. Nor was there any considerable will in the efforts that Tars Tarkas made, for the green men of Barsoom do not relish fight, nor ever before had I seen one fleeing from death in whatsoever form it might have confronted him. But that Tars Tarkas was the bravest and brave of the brave he had proven thousands of times, yes, tens of thousands in countless mortal combats with men and beasts. And so I knew that there was another reason than fear of death behind his flight, as he knew that a greater power than pride or honor spurred me to escape these fierce destroyers. In my case it was love, love of the divine Deja Thoris, and in the cause of the Thark's great and sudden love of life I could not fathom, for it is often that they seek death in life, these strange, cruel, loveless, unhappy people. At length, however, we reached the shadows of the forest, while right behind us sprang the swiftest of our pursuers, a giant plant man with his claws outreaching to fasten his blood-sucking mouths upon us. He was, I should say, 100 yards in advance of his closest companion, and so I called to Tars Tarkas to ascend the great tree that brushed the cliff's face while I dispatched the fellow, thus giving the less agile Thark an opportunity to reach the higher branches before the entire horde should be upon us and very vestige of escape cut off. But I had reckoned without just appreciation either of the cunning of my immediate antagonist nor the swiftness with which his fellows were covering the distance which had separated them from me. As I raised my longsword to deal with the creature, its death thrust, it halted in its charge, and as my sword cut harmlessly through the empty air, a great tail of the thing swept with the power of a grizzly's arm across the sward and carried me bodily from my feet to the ground. In an instant the brute was upon me, but ere it could fasten its hideous mouth to my breast and throat, I grasped the writhing tentacle in either hand. The plant man was well muscled, heavy and powerful, but my earthly sinews and greater agility, in conjunction with the deathly stranglehold that I held upon him, would have given me, I think, an eventual victory, had we had time to discuss the merits of our relative prowess uninterrupted. But as we strained and struggled about the tree into which Tars Tarkas was clambering with infinite difficulty, I suddenly caught a glimpse over the shoulder of my antagonist of the great swarm of pursuers that were now fairly upon me. Now at last I saw the nature of the other monsters who had come with the plant men in response to the weird calling of the man upon the cliff's face. They were that most dreaded of Martian creatures, the white apes of Barsoom. My former experiences upon Mars had familiarized me thoroughly with them and their methods, and I may say that of all the fearsome and terrible, weird and grotesque inhabitants of that strange world, it is the white apes that come nearest to familiarizing me with the sensation of fear. I think that the cause of this feeling with these apes engendered within me is due to their irremarkable resemblance in form to our Earthmen, which gives them a human appearance that is most uncanny when coupled with their enormous size. They stand 15 feet in height and walk erect upon their hind feet like the green Martians. They have an intermediary set of arms midway between their upper and lower limbs. Their eyes are very close set, but do not protrude as do those of the green men of Mars, and their ears are high set, but more laterally located than are the green men's, while their snouts and teeth are much like those of our African gorilla. Upon their heads grows an enormous shock of bristly white hair. It was into the eyes of such as these and the terrible plant men that I gazed above the shoulder of my foe, and then, in a mighty wave of snarling, snapping, screaming, purring rage, they swept over me. And of all the sounds that assailed my ears as I went down beneath them, to me the most hideous and horrid purring of the plant men. Instantly, A score of cruel fangs and keen talons were sunk into my flesh. Cold, sucking lips fastened themselves upon my arteries. I struggled to free myself, and even though weighed down by these immense bodies, I succeeded in struggling to my feet, where still grasping my longsword and shortening my grip upon it until I could use it as a dagger, I wrought such havoc among them that at one time I stood for an instant free. What it has taken minutes to write occurred in but a few seconds. But during the time, Tarstarchus had seen my plight and had dropped from the lower branches which he had reached with such infinite labor, and as I flung the last of my immediate antagonists from me, the great Thark leapt to my side, and again we fought back to back, as we had done 100 times before. Time and again the ferocious apes sprang in too close with us, and time again we beat them back with our swords. The great tails of the plant men lashed with tremendous power about us as they charged from various directions or sprang with the agility of greyhounds above our heads. But every attack met a gleaming blade in sword hands that had been reputed for 20 years the best that Mars had ever known, for Tarstarchus and John Carter were the names of the fighting men of the world of warriors loved best to speak. But even the two best swords in the world of fighters can avail not for ever against overwhelming numbers of fierce and savage brutes that know not what defeat means until cold steel reaches their hearts. It's no longer to beat, and so step by step we were forced back. At length we stood against the giant tree that we had chosen for our ascent, and then, as charge after charge hurtled its weight upon us, we gave back again and again until we had been forced halfway around the huge base of the colossal trunk. Tarstarchus was in the lead, and suddenly I heard a little cry of exultation from him. Here is shelter for one at least, John Carter, he said, and glancing down I saw an opening in the base of the tree about 3 feet in diameter. In with you, Tarstarchus, I cried. But he would not go, saying that his bulk was too great for the little aperture, while I might slip in easily. We shall both die if we remain without, John Carter. Here is a slight chance for one of us. Take it, and you may live to avenge me. It is useless for me to attempt to worm my way into such a small opening, with this horde of demons besetting upon us on all sides. Then we shall die together, Tarstarchus, I replied, for I shall not go first. Let me defend the opening while you get in. Then my smaller stature will permit me to slip in with you before they can prevent. We still were fighting furiously as we talked in broken sentences, punctured with vicious cuts and thrusts at our swarming enemy. At length he yielded, for it seemed the only way to which either of us might be saved from the ever-increasing number of our assailants, who were still swarming upon us from all directions across the broad valley. It was ever your way, John Carter, to think last of your own life, he said, but still more your way to command the lives and actions of others, even the greatest of Jedics who rule upon Barsoom. There was a grim smile upon his cruel, hard face as he, the greatest Jedic of them all, turned to obey the dictates of the creature of another world, a man whose stature was less than half of his own. If you fail, John Carter, he said, I know that cruel and heartless Thark, to whom you taught the meaning of friendship, will come out to die beside you. As you will, my friend, he replied, but quickly now, head first while I cover your retreat. He hesitated a little at the word, for never before in his whole life of continual strife had he turned his back upon aught than a death or defeated enemy. Haste, Tarstarchus, I urge, or we shall both go down to profitless defeat. I cannot hold them forever alone. As he dropped to the ground and forced his way into the tree, the whole howling pack of hideous devils hurled themselves upon me. To right and left threw my shimmering blade, now green with the sticky juice of the plant men, now red with the crimson blood of the great white apes, but always flying from one opponent to another, hesitating, but at the barest fraction of a second, to drink the lifeblood of the center of some savage heart. And thus I fought as I'd never fought before, against such frightful odds that I cannot realize even now that human muscles could have withstood that awful onslaught, that terrific weight of hurtling tons of ferocious battling flesh. With the fear that we would escape them, the creatures redoubled their efforts and pulled me down, and though the ground about me was piled high with their dead and dying comrades, they succeeded at last in overwhelming me, and I went down beneath them for a second time that day. and once again I felt those awful sucking lips against my flesh. But scarce had I fallen ere I felt powerful hands grip my ankles, and in another second I was being drawn within the shelter of the tree's interior. For a moment it was a tug of war between Tars Tarkas and the great plant man, who clung tenaciously to my breast, but presently I got the point of my longsword beneath them, and with a mighty thrust I pierced his vitals. Torn and bleeding from many cruel wounds, I lay panting upon the ground within the hollow of the tree, while Tars Tarkas defended the opening from the ferocious mob without. For an hour they howled about the tree, and after a few attempts to reach us, they confined their efforts to terrorizing shrieks and screams, to horrid growling on the part of the great white apes, and the fearsome and indescribable purring by the plantmen. At length, all but a score, who had apparently been left to prevent our escape, had left us, and our adventure seemed destined to result in a siege, the only outcome of which we could be our death by starvation. For even should we be able to slip out after dark, whether in this unknown and hostile valley, could we hope to turn our steps toward possible escape? As the attacks of our enemies ceased, and our eyes became accustomed to the semi-darkness of the interior of our strange retreat, I took the opportunity to explore our shelter. The tree was hollow, to the extent of about 50 feet in diameter, and from its flat, hard floor I judged that it had often been used to domicile others before our occupancy. As I raised my eyes towards its roof, I noted the height and saw before me a faint glow of light. There was an opening above. If we could but reach it, we might still hope to make the shelter of the cliff faces. My eyes had now become quite used to the subdued light of the interior, and as I pursued my investigation, I presently came upon a rough ladder, at the far side of the cave. Quickly I mounted it, only to find that it connected at the top with the lower of a series of horizontal wooden bars that spanned the now narrow and shaft-like interior of the tree stem. These bars were set one above another about 3 feet apart, and formed a perfect ladder as far above me as I could see. Dropping to the floor once more, I detailed my discovery to Tars Tarkas, who suggested that I explore aloft as far as I could go in safety while he guarded the entrance against a possible attack. As I hastened above to explore the strange shaft, I found that the ladder of the horizontal bars mounted always as far above me as my eyes could reach, and as I ascended, the light from above grew brighter and brighter. For fully 500 feet I continued to climb until at length I reached the opening in the stem which admitted the light. It was about the same diameter as the entrance at the foot of the tree, and opened directly upon a huge flat limb, the well-worn surface of which testified to its long continued use as an avenue for some creature to and from this remarkable shaft. I did not venture out upon the limb for fear that I might be discovered and our retreat in this direction cut off, but instead hurried to retrace my steps to Tars Tarkas. I soon reached him, and presently we were both ascending the long ladder toward the opening above. Tars Tarkas went in advance, and as I reached the first of the horizontal bars, I drew the ladder up after me, and, handing it to him, he carried it 100 feet further aloft, where he wedged it in safely between one of the bars and the side of the shaft. In like manner, I dislodged the lower bars as I passed them, so that we soon had the interior of the tree denuded of all possible means of ascent for the distance of 100 feet from the base, thus precluding possible pursuit and attack from the rear. As we were to learn later, this precaution saved us from dire predicament, and was eventually the means of our salvation. When we reached the opening at the top, Tars Tarkas drew to one side that I might pass out to investigate, as, owing to my lesser weight and greater agility, I was better fitted for the perilous threading of this dizzying, hanging pathway. The limb upon which we found myself ascended at a slight angle toward the cliff, and as I followed it, I found that it terminated a few feet above the narrow ledge which protruded from the cliff's face at the entrance to a narrow cave. As I approached the slightly more slender extremity of the branch, it bent beneath my weight until, as I balanced perilously upon the outer tip, it swayed gently on a level with the ledge at a distance of a couple feet. 500 feet below me lay the vivid scarlet carpet of the valley. Nearly 5,000 feet above above towered the mighty gleaming face of the gorgeous cliffs. The cave that I faced was not one of those that I had seen from the ground, and which lay much higher, possibly 1,000 feet. But so far as I might know, it was as good for our purpose as another, and so I returned to the tree for Tarkus. Together we wormed our way along the weaving path, and when we reached the end of the branch, we found that our combined weight was so depressed the limb at the cave's mouth was now far too above us to be reached. We finally agreed that Tarkus should return along the branch, leaving his longest leather harness strap with me, and that when the limb had risen to the height we would permit me to enter the cave, I was to do so, and on Tarkus' return, I could then lower the strap and haul him up to safety of the ledge. This we did without mishap, and soon found ourselves together upon the verge of a dizzy little balcony with a magnificent view of the valley spreading out below us. As far as the eye could reach, gorgeous forests and crimson swords skirted the silent sea, and about all towered the brilliant monster guardian cliffs. Once we thought we discerned a gilded minaret of gleaming in the sun amidst the waving tops of far distant trees, but we soon abandoned the idea in the belief that it was but a hallucination born of our great desire to discover the haunts of civilized men in this beautiful yet foreboding spot. Below us, upon the river's bank, great white apes were detouring, the last remnants of Tarkus' former companions, while great herds of plant men grazed in ever-widening circles about the sward, which they kept as close-clipped as the smoothest of lawns. Knowing the attack from the tree was now impossible, we determined to explore the cave, which we had every reason to believe was but a continuation of the path we had already traversed, leading the gods alone knew where, but quite evidently away from the valley of grim ferocity. As we advanced, we found a well-proportioned tunnel cut from a solid cliff. Its walls rose some 20 feet above the floor, which was about 5 feet in width. The roof was arched. We had no means of making a light, and so groped our way slowly into the ever-increasing darkness. Tarkus keeping a torch with one wall while I felt along the other. Keeping in touch with one wall while I felt along with the other, while to prevent our wandering into diverging branches and become separated or lost in some intricate and labyrinthine maze, we clasped hands. How far we traversed the tunnel in this manner, I do not know. But presently we came to an obstruction which blocked our further progress. It seemed more a partition than a sudden ending of the cave, for it was constructed not of the material of the cliff, but of something which felt like very hard wood. Silently I groped over its surface with my hands, and presently I was rewarded by the feeling of a button which as commonly denotes a door on Mars as does a doorknob on Earth. Gently pressing it, I had the satisfaction of feeling the door slowly give before me, and in another instant we were looking into a dimly lighted apartment, which, as far as we could see, was unoccupied. Without more ado, I swung the door wide open, and followed by a huge Thark, stepped into the chamber. As we stood for a moment in silence, gazing about the room, a slight noise behind me caused me to turn quickly, when, to my astonishment, I saw the door close with a sharp click as though by an unseen hand. Instantly I sprang toward it to wrench it open again, for something in the uncanny movement of the thing and the tense and almost palpable silence of the chamber seemed to portend a lurking evil lying hidden in this rock-bound chamber within the bowels of the golden cliffs. My fingers clawed futilely at the unyielding portal, while my eyes sought in vain for a duplicate of the button which had given us ingress. And then, from unseen lips, a cruel and mocking peal of laughter rang through the desolate place. Hoo-hoo! Jesse! How's it going, JR? How's it going, fam? It's good to see you. I hope you're doing well. Hungry Hollow, hope you're doing well. Really good to see y'all. Hope your Mondays are all going well. Just passing about an hour. And just past chapter 3. Gonna get into chapter 3. We're going to aim for 7 chapters tonight, so. But appreciate you guys being here and hope you had a beautiful day. Chapter 3, The Chamber of Mystery. Excellent. No better way to spend the night. For moments after that awful laugh had ceased, reverberating through the rocky room, Tarkas and I stood tense and in the expected silence. But no further sound broke the stillness, nor within the range of our vision did aught move. At length Tarkas laughed softly, after the manner of a strange kind when in the presence of a horrible or terrifying thing. It is not a hysterical laugh, but rather a genuine expression of the pleasure they derive from the things that move earthmen to loathing or to tears. Often and again have I seen them roll upon the ground in mad fits of uncontrollable mirth when witnessing the death agonies of women and little children beneath the torture of that hellish green Martian fete, the great games. I looked up at the Thark, a smile upon my own lips, for here in truth was greater need for a smiling face than the trembling chin. "What do you make of it all?" I asked. "Where in the deuce are we?" He looked at me in surprise. "Where are we?" he repeated. "Do you tell me, John Carter, that you know not where you be?" "That I am upon Barsoom is all that I can guess, and but for you and the great white apes I should not even guess that. For the sights I have seen this day are unlike the things of my beloved Barsoom, as I knew it 10 long years ago, as they are unlike the world of my birth. No, Tarkas, I know not where we be." "Where have you been since you opened the mighty portals of the atmosphere plant long years ago, after the keeper had died and the engines stopped and all Barsoom was dying, that had not already died of asphyxiation? Your body even was never found, though the men of the whole world sought after it for years. Though the Jeddak of Helium and his granddaughter, your princess, offered such fabulous rewards that even princes of royal blood joined in the search. There was but one conclusion to reach when all efforts to locate you failed, and that you had taken the long last pilgrimage down the mysterious river East to await in the valley door upon the shores of the lost sea of Chorus and the beautiful Deja Thoris, your princess. Why you had gone none could guess of your why you had gone none could guess, for your princess still lived." "Thank God," I interrupted him. "I did not dare ask you, for I feared I might have been too late to save her. She was very low when I left her in the royal gardens of Tardos Moors that long gone night, so very low that I scarcely hoped that then to reach the atmosphere plant ere her dear spirit had fled from me forever. And she yet lives?" "She lives, John Carter." "You have not told me where we are," I reminded him. "We are where I expected to find you, John Carter. And another. Many years ago you heard the story of a woman who taught me the thing that green Martians are reared to hate, the woman who taught me to love. You know the cruel tortures and the awful death of one for, her love won for her at the hands of the beast Tal Hodges. She, I thought, awaited me by the lost sea of Chorus. You know that it was left for a man from another world like yourself, John Carter, to teach this cruel Thark what friendship is, and you, I thought, also roam the carefree valley door. Thus were the two I most longed for at the end of the long pilgrimage I must take some day, and so, as the time elapsed which Deja Thoris had hoped might bring you once more to her side, for she always tried to believe that you had but temporarily returned to your own planet, I at last gave way to my great yearning, and a month since you started upon the journey, the end of which you have this day witnessed. Do you understand how now where you be, John Carter?" "And that was the Reaver East emptying into the lost sea of Chorus in the valley door?" I asked. "This is the valley of love and peace and rest to which every Barsoomian since time immemorial has longed to pilgrimage. At the end of life, of hate and strife and bloodshed," he replied. "This, John Carter, is heaven." His tone was cold and ironical, its bitterness but reflecting the terrible disappointment he had suffered. Such a fearful disillusionment, but such a blasting of lifelong hopes and aspirations. Such an uprooting of age-old tradition might have excused the vastly greater demonstration on the part of the Thark. I laid my hand upon his shoulder. I am sorry, I said, nor did there seem aught else to say. Think, John Carter, of the countless billions of Barsoomians who had taken the voluntary pilgrimage down this cruel river since the beginning of time, only to fall into the ferocious clutches of those terrible creatures that today assailed us. There is an ancient legend that once a red man returned from the banks of the lost sea of Chorus, returned from the Valley Door, back through the mysterious river East, and the legend has it that he narrated a fearful blasphemy of horrid brutes that inhabited a valley of wondrous loveliness, brutes that produced upon each Barsoomian as he terminated his pilgrimage and devoured him upon the banks of the lost sea where he had looked to find love and peace and happiness. But the ancients killed the blasphemer, as tradition has ordained that any shall be killed who return from Barsoom River of Mystery. But now we know that it is not blasphemy, that the legend is a true one, and that the man told only of what he saw. But what does it profit us, John Carter, since even should we escape, we also would be treated as blasphemers? We are between the wild thought of certainty and the mad zeteter of fact. We can escape neither. As earthmen say, we are between the devil and a deep sea, Tartarchus, I replied, nor could I help but smile at our dilemma. There is naught that we can do but take things as they come, and at least have the satisfaction of knowing that whoever slays us eventually will have far greater numbers of their own dead to count than they will get in return. White ape or plant man, green Barsoomian or red man, whoever it shall be that takes the last toll from us will know that it is costly in lives to wipe out John Carter, Prince of the House of Tardos Morse and Tars Tarkish Jeddak of Thark at the same time. I could not help but laugh at his grim humor, and he joined in with me in one of those rare laughs of real enjoyment, which was one of the attributes of his fierce Tharkian chief, which marked him from the others of his kind. But about yourself, John Carter, he cried at last. If you have not been here all these years, where indeed have you been? And how is it that you find yourself here today? I've been back on Earth, I replied. For 10 long Earth years I've been praying and hoping for the day that would carry me once more to this grim old planet of yours, for which, with all its cruel and terrible customs, I feel a bond of sympathy and love even greater than that of the world that gave me birth. For 10 years I've been enduring a living death of uncertainty and doubt to whether Deja Thoris lived, and now that, for the first time in all these years, my prayers have been answered and my doubt relieved, I find myself, through a cruel whim of fate, hurled into the one tiny spot in all of Barsoom, which there is apparently no escape. And if there were, at a price which would put out forever the last flicker of hope which I may cling to of seeing my princess again in this life. And you have seen today, with that pitiful futility man yearns towards the material hereafter. Only a bare half hour before I saw you battling with the plant man was I standing in the moonlight upon the banks of the broad river that taps the eastern shore of Earth's most blessed land. I have answered you, my friend. Do you believe? I believe, replied Tars Tarkas, though I cannot understand. As we talked, I had been searching the interior of the chamber with my eyes. It was perhaps 200 feet in length and half as broad, with what appeared to be a doorway at the center of the wall directly opposite and through which we had entered. The apartment was hewn from the material of the cliff, shown mostly dull gold in the dim light, which a single minute radium illuminator in the center of the room diffused throughout its great dimensions. Here and there, polished surfaces of ruby, emerald, and diamond, patched with golden walls and ceiling. The floor was of another material, very hard, and worn by much use of its smoothness of glass. Aside from the two doors, I could discern no sign of other aperture, and as one we knew to be locked against us, I approached the other. As I extended my hand in search of the controlling button, that cruel and mocking laugh rang out once more. so close to me this time that I involuntarily shrank back, tightening my grip upon the heel of my greatsword. And then from the far corner of the great chamber a hollow voice chanted, "There is no hope, there is no hope. The dead return not, the dead return not. Nor is there any resurrection. Hope not, for there is no hope." Though our eyes instantly turned toward the spot from which the voice seemed to emanate, there was no one in sight, and I must admit that cold shivers played along my spine, and the short hairs at the base of my head stiffened and rose up, as do upon the hound's neck when in the night his eyes see those uncanny things which are hidden from the sight of man. Quickly I walked toward the mournful voice, but it had ceased ere I reached the further wall, and then from the other end of the chamber came another voice, shrill and piercing. "Fools, fools!" it shrieked. "Thinkest thou to defeat the eternal laws of life and death? Wouldst thou cheat the mystery issues, goddess of death? Cheat the mysterious Issues, goddess of death, of her just dues? Did not her mighty messenger, the ancient East, bear you upon her laden bosom at your own behest to the valley door? Thinkest thou, O fools, that Issus wilt give up her own? Thinkest thou to escape from whence in all the countless ages but a single soul has fled? Go back the way thou camest to the merciful maws of the children of the tree of life, or the gleaming fangs of the great white apes, for there lies speedy surcease from suffering. But insist in your rash purpose to thread the maze of the golden cliffs of the mountains of Oats, past the ramparts of the impregnable fortresses of the holy Therans, and upon your way death in its most frightful form will overtake you, a death so horrible that even the holy Therans themselves, who conceive both life and death, avert their eyes from its fiendishness and close their ears against the hideous shrieks of its victims. Go back, O fools, the way thou camest." And then the awful laugh broke out from another part of the chamber. "Most uncanny," I remarked, turning to Tarkus. "What shall we do?" he asked. "We cannot fight empty air. I would almost sooner return the face foes into whose flesh I may feel my blade bite and know that I am selling my carcass dearly before I go down that eternal oblivion, which is evidently the fairest and most desirable eternity that mortal man has the right to hope for." "If, as you say, we cannot fight empty air, Tarkus," I replied, "neither, on the other hand, can empty air fight us. I, who have faced and conquered in my time thousands of sinewy warriors and tempered blades, shall not be turned back by wind, nor no more shall you, Thark." "But unseen voices may emanate from unseen and unseeable creatures who wield invisible blades," answered the green warrior. "Rot, Tarkus," I cried. "Those voices come from beings as real as you or I. In their veins flows life blood that may be led as easily as yours. And the fact that they remain invisible to us is the best proof of my mind that they are mortal, nor overly courageous mortals at that. Think you, Tarkus, that John Carter will fly at the first shriek of cowardly foe who dare not come out into the open and face a good blade?" I had spoken in a loud voice, that there might be no question that our would-be terrorizer should hear me. For I was tiring of this nerve-wracking fiasco. It had occurred to me, too, that the whole business was but a plan to frighten us back into the valley of death from which we had escaped, that we might be quickly disposed of by the savage creatures there. For a long period there was silence. Then of a sudden, a soft, stealthy sound behind me caused me to turn suddenly, to behold a great many-legged banth creeping seriously upon me. The banth is a fierce beast of prey that roams the low hills surrounding the dead seas of ancient Mars. Like nearly all Martian animals, it is almost hairless, having only a great busky mane about its thick neck. Its long, lithe body is supported by 10 powerful legs. Its enormous jaws are equipped like those of a callet or a Martian hound, with several rows of long, needle-like fangs. Its mouth reaches to a point far back of its tiny ears, while its enormous protruding eyes of green add the last touch of terror to this awful aspect. As it crept toward me, it lashed its powerful tail against the yellow sides, and when I saw that it was discovered, it emana- emanated a terrifying roar which often freezes its prey into momentary paralysis in an instant that it makes its spring. And so it launched its great bulk towards me, but its mighty voice had no paralyzing terrors over me, and it met with cold steel instead of tender flesh, as instead of the tender flesh its cruel jaws gaped so widely to engulf. An instant later I drew my blade from the still heart of this great Barsoomian lion, and turning upon Tarkus was surprised to see him facing a similar monster. No sooner had he dispatched his than I, turning, as though drawn by the instinct of my guardian's subconscious mind, beheld another of the savage denizens of the Martian's wilds leaping across the chamber toward me. From then on, for the better part of an hour, one hideous creature after another was launched upon us, springing apparently from the empty air about us. Tarkus was satisfied. Here was something tangible that he could cut and slash with his great blade, while I, for my part, may say that the diversion was a marked improvement over the uncanny voices from unseen lips. That there was nothing supernatural about our new foes was well evidenced by their howls of rage and pain as they felt the sharp steel at their vitals, and the very real blood which flowed from their severed arteries as they died the real death. I noticed during the period of this new persecution that the beast appeared only when our backs turned. We never saw one really materialize from thin air, nor did I for an instant sufficiently lose my excellent reasoning faculties to be once deluded into a belief that the beast came into the room other than through some concealed and well-contrived doorway. Among the ornaments of Tarkus' leather harness, which was the only manner of clothing worn by Martians other than the silk capes and robes of silks and furs for protection from the cold after dark, was a small mirror about the bigness of a lady's hand glass, which hung midway between his shoulders and his waist against his broad back. Once as he stood, looking down at the newly fallen antagonist, my eyes happened to fall upon his mirror, and in its shiny surface I saw pictured a sight that caused me to whisper, "Move not, Tarkus, move not a muscle." He did not ask why, but stood like a graven image while my eyes watched the strange thing that meant so much to us. What I saw was a quick movement of a section of wall behind me. It was turning upon pivots, and with the section of the floor directly in front of it was turning. It was as though you placed a visiting card upon end on a silver dollar and you laid flat upon the table, so that the edge of the card perfectly bisected the surface of the coin. The card might represent a section of the wall that turned, and the silver dollar the section of the floor. Both were so nicely fitted to the adjacent portions of the floor and the wall that no crack had been noticeable in the dim light of the chamber. As the turn was half completed, a great beast was revealed sitting upon its haunches upon that part of the revolving floor that had been on the opposite side of the wall, commenced to move. When the section stopped, the beast was facing towards me on our side of the partition. It was very simple. But what had interested me most was the sight that the half-turned section had presented through the opening that it had made, a great chamber, well lit, and which were several men and women chained to the wall, and in front of them, evidently directing the operating the movement of the secret doorway, a wicked-faced man, neither red, as were the red men of Mars, nor green, as were the green men, but white, like myself, with a great mass of flowing yellow hair. The prisoners behind him were red Martians. Chained with them were a number of fierce beasts, such as had been turned upon us, and others equally as ferocious. As I turned to meet my new foe, it was with a heart considerably lightened. "Watch the wall at your end of the chambers, Tarkus," I cautioned. "It is through a secret doorway in the wall which the brutes are loosened upon us." I was very close to him and spoke in a low whisper, that my knowledge of their secret might not be disclosed to our tormentors. As long as we remained, each facing an opposite end of the apartment, no further attacks were made upon us, so it was quite clear to me that the partitions were made in some way pierced that our actions may be observed from without. At length a plan of action occurred to me, and backing quite close to Tarkus, I unfolded my scheme in a low whisper, keeping my eyes still glued upon my end of the room. The great Thark grunted in assent, In assent to my proposition when I had done, and in accordance with my plan, commenced backing toward the wall, which I faced while he advanced slowly ahead of him. When we reached the point, some 10 feet from the secret doorway, I halted my companion and cautioned him to remain absolutely motionless until I gave the prearranged signal, and I quickly turned my back to the door, through which I could almost feel the burning and baleful eyes of our would-be executioner. Instantly, my own eyes sought the mirror upon Tarstarchus' back, and in another second I was closely watching the section of the wall which had been disgorging its savage terrors upon us. I had not long to wait, for presently the golden surface commenced to move rapidly. Scarcely had it started that I gave the signal to Tarstarchus, simultaneously springing for the receding half of the pivoting door. In like manner, the Thark wheeled and leapt for the opening being made by the in-swinging section. A single bound carried me completely through into the adjoining room, and brought me face to face with the fellow whose cruel face I had seen before. He was about my own height, and well-muscled, and in every outward detail molded precisely as an earthman. At his side hung a long sword, a short sword, a dagger, and one of the destructive radium revolvers that are common upon Mars. The fact that I was armed only with a long sword, and so according to the laws and ethics of battle everywhere upon Barsoom should only have been met with a similar or lesser weapon, seemed to have no effect upon the moral sense of my enemy, for he whipped out his revolver ere I scarce had touched the floor by his side, but an uppercut from my long sword sent it flying from his grasp before he could discharge it. Instantly he drew his long sword, and thus evenly armed we set to in earnest for one of the closest battles I had ever fought. The fellow was a marvelous swordsman, and evidently in practice, while I had not gripped the hilt of a sword for 10 long years before that morning. But it did not take me long to fall easily into my fighting stride, so that in a few minutes the man began to realize that he had at last met his match. His face became livid with rage as he found my guard impregnable, while blood flowed from a dozen minor wounds upon his face and body. "Who are you, white man?" he hissed. "That you are no Barsoomian from the outer worlds is evident from your color, and you are not of us." His last statement was almost a question. What if I were from the temple of Isus? I hazarded on the wild guess. "Fate forfend!" he exclaimed, his face going white under the blood that now nearly covered it. I did not know how to follow up my lead, but I carefully laid the idea away for future use should circumstances require it. His answer indicated that for all he knew I might be from the temple of Isus, and in it were men unto like myself. And either this man feared the inmates of the temple, or else he held their persons or their power in such reverence that he trembled to think of the harm and indignities he had heaped upon one of them. But my present business with him was of a different nature, and then that was which requires any considerable abstract reasoning. It was to get my sword between his ribs, and this I succeeded in doing within the next few seconds, nor was I an instant too soon. The chained prisoners had been watching the combat in tense silence. Not a sound had fallen in the room other than the clashing of our contending blades, the soft shuffles of our naked feet, and a few whispered words we had hissed at each other through clenched teeth the while we continued our moral duel. But as the body of my antagonist sank into an inert mass onto the floor, a cry of warning broke from one of the female prisoners. "Turn behind you!" she shrieked, and as I wheeled at the first note of her shrill cry, I found myself facing a second man of the same race as he who lay at my feet. The fellow had crept stealthily from the dark corridor and was almost upon me with raised sword ere I saw him. Tarstarchus was nowhere in sight, and the secret panel of the wall through which I had come was closed. How I wished he were here by my side now. I had fought almost continuously for many hours. I had passed through such experiences and adventures as must sap the vitality of man. And with all this, I had not eaten for nearly 24 hours, nor slept. I was fagged out, and for the first time in years felt a question as to my ability to cope with the antagonist, but there was naught else for it than to engage my man, and that as quickly and ferociously it lay in me. For my only salvation was to rush him off his feet by the impetuosity of my attack. I could not hope to win a long drawn out battle. But the fellow was evidently of another mind, for he backed and parried and sidestepped until I was almost completely fagged from exhaustion and exertion of attempting to finish him. He was a more adroit swordsman, if possible, than my previous foe, and I must admit that he led me a pretty chase and in the end came near to making a sorry fool of me, and a dead one into the bargain. I could feel myself growing weaker and weaker until at length objects commenced to blur before my eyes and I staggered and blundered about, more asleep than awake. And then it was that he worked his pretty little coup that came near to losing my life. He had backed me around so that I stood in front of the corpse of his fellow, and then he rushed me so suddenly that I was forced to back upon it, and as my heel struck it, the impetus of my body flung me backwards across the dead man. My head struck the hard pavement with a resounding whack, and to that alone I owe my life, for it cleared my brain and the pain roused my temper, so that I was equal for the moment to tearing my enemy to pieces with my bare hands, and I verily believe that I should have attempted it had not my right hand, in the act of rising my body from the ground, came in contact with a bit of cold metal. As the eyes of the layman, so is the hand of the fighting man when it comes to contact with the impalement of his vocation, and thus I did not need to look for a reason to know that the man's revolver, lying where it had fallen when I had struck it from his grasp, was at my disposal. The fellow whose ruse had put me down was springing towards me, the point of his gleaming blade directed straight at my heart, and as he came there rang from his lips a cruel and mocking peal of laughter that I had heard within the chamber of mystery. And so he died, his thin lips curled in a snarl of his hatred laugh, and the bullet of the revolver of his dead companion bursting in his heart. His body, borne by the impetus of his long-headed rush, plunged upon me. The hilt of his sword must have struck my head, for with the impact of the corpse I lost consciousness. Hey, what's up, missions? Buttless chaps. Star Wars burger for dinner. Let's go. So I am relaxed. It was definitely been a long day. Feel bad. I keep messing up words. Eating, listening. Appreciate you, Christina and Yuna. Excellent. Love that, D. Yuna. Have a great day, missions. I'm sure you are gone. My bad. But really appreciate you, brother. I hope you have a good rest of your day. I have a feeling these chapters are a lot longer than the first book. So we're going to start chapter 4 and see where we get. But super appreciate you guys hanging out. I need to see if I can do this. Oh, that's as low as it goes. All right. Chapter 4, Thuvia. It was the sound of conflict that aroused me once more to the realities of life. For a moment I could neither place my surroundings nor locate the sounds which had aroused me. And then from behind the blank wall beside me, which I lay, I heard the shuffling of feet, the snarling of grim beasts, the clank of metal accoutrements, and the heavy breathing of a man. As I rose to my feet, I glanced hurriedly about the chamber in which I had just encountered such a warm reception. The prisoners and the savage brutes rested in their chains by the opposite wall, eyeing me with the varying expression of curiosity, sullen rage, surprise, and hope. The latter emotion seemed plainly evident upon the handsome and intelligent face of the young red Martian woman, whose cry of warning had been instrumental in saving my life. She was the perfect type of that remarkably beautiful race whose outward appearance is identical with the more godlike races of the Earthman, except that this higher race of Martians is of a light reddish copper color. As she was entirely unadorned, I could not have guessed her station in life, though it was evident that she was neither a prisoner or slave from her present environment. It was several seconds before the sounds upon the opposite side of the partition jolted my slowly returning faculties into a realization of their probable import, and then of a sudden I grasped the fact that they were caused by Tars Tarkas and what was evidently a desperate struggle with wild beasts or savage men. With a cry of encouragement, I threw my weight against the secret door, but as the well have essayed the down hurtling of the cliffs themselves, then I but as well have essayed the down hurtling of the cliffs themselves. Then I sought feverishly for the secret of the revolving panel, but my search was fruitless, and I was about to raise my longsword against the sullen gold when a young woman prisoner called out to me, "Save thy sword, O mighty warrior, for thou shalt need more where it will avail to some purpose. Shatter it not against the senseless metal which yields better to the lightest finger touch of one who knows its secret." "You know the secret of it, then?" I asked. "Yes, release me, and I will give you entrance to the other horror chamber, if you wish. The keys to my fetters are upon the first dead of thy foemen." "But why would you return to face again the fierce banth, or whatever other form of destruction they have loosened within the awful trap?" "Because my friend fights there alone," I answered, as I hastily sought and found the keys upon the carcass of the dead custodian of this grim chamber of horrors. There were many keys upon the oval ring, but the fair Martian maid quickly selected that which sprung the great lock at her waist, and freed, she hurried towards the secret panel. Again she sought out a key upon the ring, and this time a slender needle-like affair, which she inserted in the almost invisible hole on the wall. Instantly the door swung open on its pivot, and the contiguous section of the floor upon which I was standing carried me with it into the chamber where Tarsarchus fought. The great Thark stood with his back against the angle of the wall, while facing him in a semicircle a half-dozen huge monsters crouched waiting for an opening. Their blood-streaked hands and shoulders testified to the cause of their wariness, as well as to the swordsmanship of the green warrior, whose glossy hide bore the same mute but eloquent witness to the ferocity of the attacks that he had so far withstood. Sharp talons and cruel fangs had torn arm and leg and breast literally to ribbons. So weak was he from continued exertion and loss of blood that but for the supporting wall I doubt he would have been able to stood erect. But with the tenacity and indomitable courage of his kind, he still faced his cruel and relentless foes, the personification of that ancient proverb of his tribe, "Leave to a Thark his head in one hand, and he may yet conquer." As he saw me enter, a grim smile touched those grim lips of his, but whether the smile signified relief or merely amusement at the sight of my own bloody and disheveled condition, I do not know. As I was about to spring into the conflict with my sharp long sword, I felt a gentle hand upon my shoulder, and turning, found to my surprise that the young woman had followed me into the chamber. "Wait," she whispered. "Leave them to me," and pushing me, advanced, all defenselessness and unarmed, upon the snarling banths. When quite close to them, she spoke a single Martian word in a low and peremptory tones. Like lightning, the great beast wheeled upon her, and I looked to see her torn to pieces before I could reach her side, but instead, the creature slunk to her feet like puppies that expect a merited whipping. Again, she spoke to them, but in tones so low I could not catch the words, and then she started toward the opposite side of the chamber, with the 6 mighty monsters trailing at her heel. One by one she sent them through the secret panel into the room beyond, and when the last had passed from the chamber, where we stood in wide-eyed amazement, she turned and smiled at us, and then herself passed through, leaving us alone. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then Tarkus said, "I heard the fighting beyond this partition through which you passed, but I did not fear for you, John Carter, until I heard the report of a revolver shot. I knew that there lived no man upon all Barsoom who could face you with naked steel and live, but the shot stripped the last vestige of hope from me, since you I knew to be without firearms. Tell me of it." I did as he bade, and then together we sought the secret panel through which I had just entered the apartment, the one at the opposite end of the room from that through which the girl had led her savage companions. To our disappointment, the panel eluded our every effort to negotiate its secret lock. We felt that once beyond it we might look with some little hopes of success for a passage to the outside world. The fact that prisoners within were securely chained led us to believe that surely there must be an avenue of escape from the terrible creatures which inhabited this unspeakable place. Again and again we turned from one door to another, from the baffling gold panel at one end of the chamber to its mate at the other, equally baffling. When we had about given up all hope, one of the panels turned silently towards us, and the young woman who had led away the bant stood once more beside us. "Who are you?" she asked, "and what your mission, that you have the temerity to attempt to escape the valley door and the death you have chosen?" "I have chosen no death, maiden," I replied. "I am not of Barsoom, nor have I taken yet the voluntary pilgrimage upon the river East. My friend here is Jeddak of the Tharks, and though he had not yet expressed a desire to return to the living world, I am taking him with me from the living lie that hath lured him to this frightful place. I am of another world. I am John Carter, prince of the house of Tardos Morse, Jeddak of Helium. Perchance some faint rumor of me may have leaked within the confines of your hellish abode." She smiled. "Yes," she replied. "Naught that passes in the world we have left is unknown here. I have heard of you many years ago. The Therns have ofttimes wondered whether you had flown, since you had neither taken the pilgrimage nor had been found upon the face of Barsoom." "Tell me," I said, "and who be you, and why a prisoner, yet with power over the ferocious beasts of the place that denotes familiarity and authority far beyond that which might be expected of a prisoner or a slave?" "Slave I am," she answered. "For 15 years a slave in this terrible place, and now that they have tired of me and become fearful to the power which my knowledge of their ways have given me, I am but recently condemned to die the death." She shuddered. "What death?" I asked. "The holy Therns eat human flesh," she answered me, "but only that which has died beneath the sucking lips of the plant men, flesh from which the defining blood of life has been drawn. And to this cruel end I have been condemned. It was not to be within a few hours, had your advent not caused an interruption of their plans." "Was it then holy Therns who felt the weight of John Carter's hand?" I asked. "Oh no, those whom you lay low are lesser Therns, but of the same cruel and hateful race. The holy Therns abide upon the outer slopes of these grim hills, facing the broad world from which they harvest their victims and their spoils. Labyrinthine passages connecting these caves and the luxurious palaces of the holy Therns, and through them pass upon the many duties of lesser Therns, land hordes of slaves and prisoners and fierce beasts and grim inhabitants of this sunless world. There be within this vast network of winding passages and countless chambers men, women, and beasts who, born within its dim, gruesome underworld, have never seen the light of day, nor ever shall. They are kept to do the bidding of the race of the Therns, to furnish at once their sport and their sustenance. Now and again some hapless pilgrim drifting out upon our silent sea from the cold east escapes the plant men and the great white apes that guard the temple of Isus and falls into the remorseless clutch of the Therns, or, as was my misfortune, is coveted by the holy Thern who chances to be upon watch in the balcony above the river, where it issues from the bowels of the mountains through the cliffs of the gold to empty into the lost sea of Chorus. All who reach the valley door are, by custom, the rightful prey of the plant men and the apes, while their arms and ornaments become the portion of the Therns. But if one escapes the terrible denizen of the valley for even a few hours, the Therns may claim such a one as their own. And again the holy Thern on watch, should he see a victim he covets, often tramples upon the rights of the unreasoning brutes for the valley, and takes his prize by foul means if he cannot gain it by fair. It is said that occasionally some diluted victim of Barsoomian superstition will so far escape the clutches of the countless enemies that beset his path from the moment that he emerges from the subterranean passage through which the east flows for 1,000 miles before it enters the valley door, as to reach the very walls of the temple of Isus. But what fate awaits one there not even the holy Therns may guess. For who has passed within those gilded walls has never returned to unfold the mysteries that we've held since the beginning of time. The Temple of Issus is to the Therns what the Valley Door is imagined by the people of the outer world to be to them. It is the ultimate heaven of peace, refuge, and happiness to which they pass after this life, and wherein an eternity of eternities is spent amidst the delights of the flesh, which appeal most strongly to this race of mental giants and moral pygmies. The Temple of Issus is, I take it, a heaven within a heaven, I said. Let us hope that there it will be meted to the Therns, as they have meted it here unto others. Who knows? The girl murmured. The Therns, I judge from what you have said, are no less mortal than we. And yet, have I always heard them spoken of the utmost awe and reverence by the people of Barsoom, as one might speak of the gods themselves? The Therns are mortal, she replied. They die from the same causes as you or I might. Those who do not live their allotted lifespan, 1,000 years, when by the authority of customs they may take their way into happiness through the long tunnel that leads to Issus. Those who die before they are supposed to spend the balance of their allotted time in the image of the plant men, and it is for this reason that the plant men are held sacred by the Therns, since they believe that each of these hideous creatures was formerly a Thern. And should a plant man die? I asked. Should he die before the expiration of the 1,000 years from birth of the Thern whose immortality bides within him, then the soul passes into the great white ape. And should the ape die short of the exact 1 hour that terminates the 1,000 years of soul for every lost, and passes for all eternity into the carcass of the slimy and fearsome Scylians, whose wiggling thousands seethe the silent sea beneath the hurtling moons, when the sun has gone and strange shapes walk through the valley door. We sent several holy thorns to the Scylians today, then, said Tarstarchus, laughing. And so will your death be more terrible when it comes? Said the maiden. And come it will, you cannot escape. One has escaped centuries ago, I reminded her, and what has been done may be done again. It is useless to even try, she answered hopelessly. But try we shall, I cried, and you shall go with us if you wish. To be put to death by my own people, and render my memory a disgrace to my family and my nation? A prince of the house of Tardos Mor should know better than to suggest such a thing. Tarstarchus listened in silence, but I could feel his eyes riveted upon me, and I knew he awaited my answer, as one might listen to the reading of his sentence by the foreman of jury. What I advised the girl to do would seal our fate as well, since if I bowed to the inevitable decree of old age superstition, we must all remain and meet our fate in some horrible form within this awful abode of horror and cruelty. We had the right to escape if we can, I answered. Our own moral senses will not be offended if we succeed, for we know that the fabled life of love and peace in the blessed Valley of Dor is a ranked and wicked description. We know that the valley is not sacred. We know that the holy Therns are not holy, that they are the race of cruel and heartless mortals, knowing no more of the real life to come than we do. Not only is this our right to bend every effort to escape, but it is a solemn duty from which we should not shrink, even though we know that we should be revealed and tortured by our own people when we return to them. Only thus must we carry the truth to those without, and through the likelihood of our narrative being given credence is, I grant you, remote, so wedded are mortals to their stupid infatuation for impossible superstitions. We should be craven cowards indeed, were we to shrink the plain duty which confronts us. Again, there's a chance that with the weight of this testimony of several of us, the truth of our statements may be accepted, and at least a compromise effected, which will result in the dispatching of the expedition of investigating to this hideous mockery of heaven. Both the girl and the green warrior stood silent in thought for some moments. The former, it was who eventually broke the silence. Never had I considered this matter in the light before, she said. Indeed, would I give my life 1,000 times if I could but save a single soul from the awful life that I had led in this cruel place? Yes, you're right, and I will go with you as far as I can go, but I doubt we shall ever escape. I turned an inquiring glance towards the Thark. To the gates of Issus, or to the bottom of Chorus, spoke the green warrior. To the snows of the north, or the snows of the south. Tarkus follows, John Carter leads. I have spoken. Come then, I cried. We must make our start, for we could not be further from escape than we now are in the heart of this mountain and within the four walls of this chamber of death. Come then, said the girl, but do not flatter yourself that you can find no worse place than this within the territory of the Therans. So saying, she swung a secret panel that separated us from the apartment in which I had found her, and we stepped through once more into the presence of the other prisoners. There were all 10 red Martians, men and women, and when we had briefly explained our plan, they decided to join forces with us. Though it was evident that it was with some considerable misgivings that they thus tempted fate by opposing an ancient superstition, even though each knew through cruel experience the fallacy of this entire fabric. Thuvia, the girl whom I had first freed, soon had the others at liberty. Tarkus and I stripped the bodies of the two Therans of their weapons, which included swords, daggers, 2 revolvers of the curious and deadly type manufactured by the Red Martians. We distributed the weapons as far as they would go among our followers, giving the firearms to 2 of the women, Thuvia being one so armed. With the latter as our guide, we set off rapidly and cautiously through the maze of passages, crossing great chambers hewn from the solid metal of the cliff, following winding corridors, ascending steep inclines, and now and again concealing ourselves in dark recesses at the sound of approaching footsteps. Our destination, Thuvia said, was a distant storeroom where arms and ammunition in plenty might be found. From there, she was to lead us to the summit of the cliffs, from where it would require both wondrous wit and mighty fighting to win our way through the very heart of the stronghold of the Holy Therans and the world without. And even then, O Prince, she cried, the arm of the Holy Theran is long. It reaches to every nation of Barsoom. His secret temples are hidden in the heart of every community. Wherever we go, should we escape, we shall find that word of our coming has preceded us, and death awaits us before we may pollute the air with our blasphemies. We had proceeded for possibly an hour without serious interruption, and Thuvia had just whispered to me that we were approaching our first destination. When, on entering the great chamber, we came upon a man, evidently a Theran. He wore, in addition to his leathern trappings, the jeweled ornaments, and great circlet of gold about his brow, in the exact center of which was set an immense stone, the exact counterpart of which I had seen upon the breast of the little old man in the atmosphere plant nearly 20 years before. It is the one priceless jewel of Barsoom. Only 2 are known to exist, and these were worn as the insignia of their rank and position by the 2 old men in whose charge was placed the operation of the great engine which pumped the artificial atmosphere to all parts of Mars from the huge atmosphere plant, the secret to whose mighty portals placed in my possession the ability to save from immediate extinction the life of the whole world. The stone worn by the Theran who confronted us was of about the same size as that which I had seen before, an inch in diameter, I should say. It scintillated 9 different and distinct rays, the 7 primary colors of our earthly prism, and 2 rays which are unknown upon Earth, but whose wondrous beauty is indescribable. As the Theran saw us, his eyes narrowed to 2 nasty slits. "Stop!" he cried. "What means this, Thuvia?" For answer, the girl raised her revolver and fired point blank at him. Without a sound, he sank to the earth, dead. "Beast," she hissed, "after all these years, I am the last revenged." Then, as she turned toward me, evidently with the word of explanation on her lips, her eyes suddenly widened as they rested upon me, and with little examination she started toward me. "Oh, Prince," she cried, Fate is indeed kind to us. The way it is still difficult, but through this vile thing upon the floor we may yet win to the outer world. Notice thou not the remarkable resemblance to between this holy Theron and thyself? The man was indeed of my precise stature, nor were his eyes and features unlike mine. But his hair was a mass of flowing yellow locks, like those of the two he had killed, while mine was black and close cropped. What of the resemblance? I asked the girl Thuvia. Do you wish me with my black short hair to pose as a yellow-haired priest of this infernal cult? She smiled, and for answer approached the body of the man she had slain, and kneeling beside it, removed the circlet of gold from his forehead, and then, to my utter amazement, lifted the entire scalp bodily from the corpse's head. Rising, she advanced to my side, placing the yellow wig over my black hair, crowning me with the golden circlet set with the magnificent gem. How don his harness, prince? She said, and you may pass where you shall in the realms of the Therons, for Satar Throg was a holy thorn of the 10th cycle, and mighty among his kind. As I stooped to the dead man to do her bidding, I noted that not a hair grew upon his head, which he was quite bald as an egg. They are all thus from birth, explained Thuvia, noting my surprise. Their race from which they sprang were crowned with luxuriant growth of golden hair, but for many ages, the present race has been entirely bald. The wig, however, has come to be part of their appeal, and so important a part to do, they consider it that it is cause for the deepest disgrace to the Theron were a Theron to appear in public without it. In another moment I stood, garbed in the habiliments of the Holy Theron. At Thuvia's suggestion, 2 of the released prisoners bore the body of the dead Theron upon their shoulders with us as we continued our journey toward the storeroom, which we reached without further mishap. Here the keys which Thuvia bore from the dead Theron of the prison vault were the means of giving us immediate entrance into the chamber, and very quickly we were thoroughly outfitted with arms and ammunition. By this time I was so thoroughly fagged out that I could go no further. So I threw myself upon the floor, bidding Tars Tarkas to do likewise, and cautioning 2 of the released prisoners to keep careful watch. In an instant, I was asleep. Holy moly. Hope you're better, Lolo. Hope you're well. What's up, Lori Lovejoy? Hope you're doing well. Caught a story time. Woo! Random suggestion, bi-weekly Discord reading. Like that, we can read a book without worrying of YouTube getting angry. We read a modern book. Yeah, let me put thought into it. Is there a random book that you would want to read? All right. So these chapters are a lot longer than the first book. So we might break it down into sections of 5. Dragon Age. Could read the Dragonlance Chronicles. I don't know. I'll think about it for sure. Yeah, I'll think about it for sure. So let's get through this here. I know that we're just at about that 2-hour mark, but let's get through 5 chapters. And we might do 5 chapter streams of this book. Yeah, these ones are a little bit longer as all. So let's go ahead and finish it for tonight with chapter 5, which is Corridors of Peril. How long I slept upon the floor of the storeroom I do not know, but it must have been many hours. I was awakened with a start of cries of alarm, and scarce were my eyes opened, nor had I yet sufficiently collected my wits to quite realize where I was, when the fusillade of shots rang out, reverberating through the subterranean corridors in a series of deafening echoes. In an instant I was upon my feet. A dozen lesser Therans confronted us from a large doorway at the opposite end of the storeroom from which we had entered. About me lay the bodies of my companions, and the exception of Thuvia and Tars Tarkas, who, like myself, had been asleep on the floor and thus escaped the first raking fire. As I gained my feet, the Therans lowered their wicked rifles, their faces distorted in mingled chagrin, consternation, and alarm. Instantly I rose to the occasion. "What means this?" I cried in tones of fierce anger. "Is Satar Thog to be murmured by his own vassal?" Uh, "Have mercy, O master of the 10th cycle," cried one of the fellows, while the others edged toward the doorway as though in an attempt to surreptitious escape from the presence of the Mighty One. "Ask them their mission here," whispered Thuvia at my elbow. "What do you do here, fellows?" I cried. "Two from the outer world are at large within the dominions of the Therns. We sought them at the command of the father of the Therns. One of them was white with black hair, the other a huge green warrior." And here the fellow cast a suspicious glance towards Tars Tarkas. "Here, then, is one of them," spoke Thuvia, indicating the Thark. "And if you will look upon this dead man by the door, perhaps you will recognize the other." It was left for Sator Thog and his poor slaves to accomplish what the lesser Therns and the guards were unable to do. We have killed one and captured the other, for this had Satar Throg given us our liberty. And now, in your stupidity, you have come and killed all but myself, and like to have killed the mighty Satar Throg himself. The men looked very sheepish and very scared. Had they not better thrown these bodies to the plant men than to return to their own quarters, O mighty one? Asked Thuvia of me. "Yes, do as Thuvia bids you," I said. As the man picked up the bodies, I noticed that the one who stooped to gather up the late Sator Throg started at his closer scrutiny, fell upon the upturned face, and then the fellow stole a furtive, seeking glance in my direction from the corner of his eye. That he suspicioned something of the truth, I could have sworn, but that it was only a suspicion which he did not dare voice was evidenced by his silence. Again, as he bore the body from the room, he shot a quick but searching glance towards me, and then his eyes fell once more upon the bald and shiny dome of the dead man in his arms. The last fleeting glimpse that I obtained of his profile as he passed from my sight without the chamber revealed a cunning smile of triumph upon his lips. Only Tars Tarkas, Thuvia, and I were left. The fatal marksmanship of the Therns had snatched from our companions whatever slender chance we had of gaining a perilous freedom of the world without. So soon as the last of the gruesome procession had disappeared, the girl urged us to take up our flight once more. She too had noted the questioning attitude of the Theron who had borne Saltor Throg away. "It bodes no good for us, O Prince," she said, "for even though this fellow dared not chance accusing you in error, there be those above with power sufficient to demand a closer scrutiny, and that, Prince, would indeed prove fatal." I shrugged my shoulders. It seemed that, in any event, the outcome of our plight must end in death. I was refreshed from my sleep, but still weak from the loss of blood. My wounds were painful. No medicinal aid seemed possible. How I longed for the almost miraculous healing power of the strange salves and lotions of the green Martian women. In an hour they would have had me. As new. I was discouraged. Never had a feeling of such utter hopelessness come over me in the face of danger. Then the long flowing yellow locks of the holy Theron, caught by some vagrant drop, blew about my face. Might they not still open the way of freedom? If we acted in time, might we not yet be escaped before the general alarm was sounded? We could at least try. "What will the fellow do first, Thuvia?" I asked. "How long will it be before they may return to us?" "He will go directly to the father of Therons, old Matai Shang, and uh, He may have to wait for an audience, but since he is very high among the lesser Therans, in fact, as a Thorian among them, it will not be long that Matai Shang will keep him waiting. Then, if the Fowler of Therans puts credence in his story, another hour will see the galleries and chambers and courts and gardens filled with searchers. What we do then must be done within an hour. What is the best way, Thuvia, the shortest way out of the celestial Hades? Straight to the top of the cliffs, Prince, she replied, and then through the gardens to the inner courts. From there our way will lie within the temples of the temples of the Therns, and across them to the outer court. Then the ramparts. Oh, Prince, it is hopeless. 10,000 warriors could not hew a way to liberty from this awful place. Since the beginning of time, little by little, stone by stone, have the Therns ever been adding to the defenses of their stronghold. A continuous line of impregnable fortifications circles the outer slopes of the mountains of Otz. Oh, excuse me. Within the temples that lie beyond the ramparts, 1,000,000 fighting men are ever ready. The courts and gardens are filled with slaves and women with children. None could go a stone's throw without detection. If there is no other way, Thuvia, why dwell upon the difficulties of this? We must face them. Can we not better make an attempt after dark? Asked Tarstarchus. There would seem to be no chance by day. There would be little better chance by night. But even then the ramparts are well guarded, possibly better than by day. There are fewer abroad in the courts and gardens, though, said Thuvia. What is the hour? I asked. It was midnight when you released me from my chains, said Thuvia. 2 hours later we reached the storeroom. There we slept for 14 hours. It must now be nearly sundown again. Come, we will go to some nearby window of the cliff to make sure. So saying, she led the way through the winding corridors until a sudden turn we came upon an opening which overlooked the valley door. At our right the sun was setting, a huge red orb, below the western range of Otz. A little below us stood the holy Thern on watch upon his balcony. His scarlet robe of office was pulled tightly about him in anticipation of the cold that comes so suddenly with darkness as the sun sets. So rare is the atmosphere of Mars that it absorbs every little heat from the sun. During the daylight hours it is always extremely hot. At night it is instantly cold. Nor does the thin atmosphere refract the sun's rays or diffuse its light, as upon Earth. There is no twilight on Mars. When the great orb of the day disappears beneath the horizon, the effect is precisely as that of the extinguishing of a single lamp within the chamber. From brilliant light, you are plunged without warning into utter darkness. Then the moons come. The mysterious magic moons of Mars, hurtling like monster meteors low across the face of the planet. The declining sun lit brilliantly the eastern banks of Chorus, the crimson sword, and the gorgeous forest. Beneath the trees we saw feeding many herds of plant men. The adults stood aloft upon their toes and their mighty tails, their talons pruning every available leaf and twig. It was then I understood the careful trimming of the trees which had led me to form the mistaken idea when first I opened my eyes upon the grove that it was a playground of the civilized people. As we watched, our eyes wandered from the rolling east which issued from the base of the cliffs beneath us. Presently there emerged from the mountains a canoe laden with lost souls from the outer world. There were a dozen of them. All were of highly civilized and cultured race of red men who were dominant on Mars. The eyes of the herald upon the balcony beneath us fell upon the doomed party as soon as did ours. He raised his head and, leaning far out over the low rail that rimmed his dizzy perch, voiced the shrill, weird wail that called the demons of the hellish place to attack. For an instant, the brutes stood with stiffly erect ears, and they poured from over the grove toward the river's banks, covering the distance with great, ungainly leaps. The party had landed and was standing on the sward as the awful horde came into sight. There was a brief and futile effort of defense, then silence, as the huge, repulsive shapes covered the bodies of their victims and scores of sucking mouths fastened themselves onto the flesh of their prey. I turned away in disgust. Their part is soon over, said Thuvia. The great white apes get the flesh when the plant men have drained the arteries. Look, they're coming now. As I turned my eyes in the direction of the girl indicated, I saw a dozen of the great white monsters running across the valley toward the river bank. Then the sun went down, and darkness that could be almost felt engulfed us. Thuvia lost no time in leading us toward the corridor which winds back and up forth towards the cliffs that surround the thousands of feet on the level in which we had been. Twice great bants wandering loose through the galleries blocked our progress, but in each instance Thuvia spoke a low word of command, and the snarling beast slunk sullily away. If you can dissolve all our obstacles as easily as you master these fierce brutes, I can see no difficulties on our way, I said to the girl, smiling. How do you do it? She laughed, and then she shuddered. I do not quite know, she said. When I first came here, I angered Sator Throg because I repulsed him. He ordered me to be thrown into one of the great pits in the inner gardens. It was filled with bants. In my own country, I had been accustomed to command. Something in my voice, I do not know what, cowed the beasts as they sprang at me. Instead of tearing me to pieces, as Sator Throg had desired, they fawned at my feet. So greatly were Sator Throg and his friends amused by the sight that they kept me to train and handle the terrible creatures. I know them all by name. There are many of them wandering through these lower regions. They are the scavengers. Many prisoners die here in their chains. The Banths solve the problem of sanitation, at least in this respect. In the gardens and the temples above, they are kept in pits. The Therns fear them. That is because of the Banths, that they seldom venture below ground except on their duties call them. An idea occurred to me, suggested by what Thuvia just said. Why not take a number of Banths and set them loose before us above ground? I asked. Thuvia laughed. It would distract attention from us, I'm sure, she said. She commenced calling in a low, singing voice that was a half purr, and she continued this as we wound our tedious way through the maze of subterranean passages and chambers. Presently soft, padded feet sounded close behind us, and as I turned I saw a pair of great green eyes shining in the dark shadows of our rear. From the diverging tunnel a sinuous tawny form crept stealthily toward us. Low growls and angry snarls assailed our ears on every side as we hastened on one by one. The ferocious creatures answered the calls of the mistress. She spoke a word to each as it joined us. Like well-schooled terriers, they paced up the corridors with us. But I could not help but note the lathering jowls, nor the hungry expression from which they eyed Tarkus and myself. Soon we were entirely surrounded by some 50 brutes. 2 walked close to either side of Thuvia, as guards might walk. The sleek sides of others now and then touched my own naked limbs. As was a strange experience, the almost noiseless passage of naked human feet and padded paws, the golden walls splashed with precious stones, the dim light cast by the tiny radium bulbs set a considerable distance along the roof, the huge man-beast of prey crowding with the low growls about us, the mighty green warrior towering high above us all, myself crowned with the priceless diadem of the holy Thern, and leading the procession, the beautiful girl Thuvia. I shall not soon forget it. Presently, we approached the great chamber, more brightly lighted than the corridors. Thuvia halted us. Quietly, she stole towards the entrance and glanced within. Then she motioned us to follow her. The room was filled with specimens of the strange beings that inhabited this underworld. The heterogeneous collection of hybrids, the offspring of the prisoners from the outside world, red and green Martians, and the white race of Therns. Constant confinement below ground had wrought odd freaks upon their skin. They more resembled corpses than living beings. Many are deformed, others maimed, while the majority, Thuvia explained, are sightless. As they lay sprawled upon the floor, sometimes overlapping one another, again in heaps of several bodies, They suggested instantly to me the grotesque illustrations that I had seen in copies of Dante's Inferno. And what more fitting comparison? Was this not indeed the veritable hell peopled by lost soul, dead and damned beyond all hope? Picking our way carefully, we threaded the winding path across the chamber, the great banths, sniffing hungrily at the tempting prey, spread before them in such tantalizing and defenselessness profusion. Several times we passed the entrances to other chambers similarly peopled, and twice again we were compelled to cross directly through them. In others were chained prisoners and beasts. "Why is it that we see no Therns?" I asked of Thuvia. "They seldom traverse the underworld at night, and then it is that the great banths prowl the dim corridors seeking their prey. The Therns fear the awful denizens of the cruel and hopeless world that they have fostered and allowed to grow beneath their feet. The prisoners even sometimes turn upon them and rend them. The Theron can never tell from what dark shadow an assassin may spring upon his back. By day it is difficult. Then the corridors and chambers are filled with guards passing to and fro. Slaves from the temples above come by hundreds to the grantaries and storerooms. All is life then. You did not see it because I led you not in the beaten tracks, but through the roundabout passages seldom used. Yet it's possible that we may meet a Theron even yet. They do occasionally find it necessary to come here after the sun has set. Because of this, I have moved with such great caution. But we reached the upper galleries without detection, and presently Thuvia halted us at the foot of the short, steep ascent. Above us, she said, is a doorway which opens on to the inner gardens. I brought you thus far. From here, on our 4 miles to the outer ramparts, our way will be beset by countless dangers. Guards patrol the courts, the temples, the gardens. Every inch of the ramparts themselves is beneath the eye of a sentry. I could not understand the necessity for such an enormous force of armed men about a spot so surrounded by mysterious and superstition that not a soul upon Barsoom would have dared approach it, even had they known its exact location. I questioned Thuvia, asking her what enemies the Therns could fear in their impregnable forces. We had reached the doorway now, and Thuvia was opening it. "They fear the black pirates of Barsoom, O Prince," she said, "from whom may our first ancestors preserve us." The door swung open. The smell of growing things greeted my nostrils. The cool night air blew against my cheek. The great banths sniffed the unfamiliar odors, and then, with a rush, they broke past us with low growls, swarming across the gardens beneath. The lurid light of the nearer moon. The gardens beneath the lurid light of the nearer moon. Suddenly a great cry arose from the roofs of the temples, a cry of alarm and warning that, taken up from this point to point, ran off to the east and to the west, from temple court and rampart, until it sounded as a dim echo in the distance. The great Thark's long sword leapt from its scabbard. Thuvia shrank, shuddering, to my side. And that's the end of chapter 5. Okay, yeah, that's a really, really, really long chapter. All right, I think I'm going to do us all that favor. You guys are hysterical. And I appreciate you guys hanging out. More than toasted PBJ. There you go. Kit Kat sounds good. But as these are insanely long chapters, it would take me yet another 45 minutes to read the rest that I had intended. So now that I know, I think we're just going to keep these at 5 chapters. And honestly, all the words are getting hard to see. So I want to make sure I deliver the best product that I can always. So with that, we are going to call it there. I hope you enjoyed the read tonight. Got to John Carter, man, he got sent to the one place that he can't return from. This is going to be a grand adventure. And he better find Deja Thoris at the end of it. That's all I got to say. I don't know who this Thuvia chick is, but got to remember he's married to a princess. But with that, I do hope liking this book more than the first. Yeah, I think that it's we didn't have a whole lot of description. He started talking right away, where the first one he kind of had to learn, so there was like 10 chapters of just dialogue. But yeah, I absolutely appreciate that, and I do too. I'm really looking forward to the next read, and we'll see if Tars Tarkas and John Carter can escape heaven. Okay, I love you too, D. And I love you all. I very much appreciate you guys hanging out. I hope that I helped you relax a little bit tonight with the read. Typically, this is when I go ahead and take a look and see if there's anybody live currently that we would like to raid. Let me see who's on, or rather, who isn't on, because I know that there was a lot of peeps that were on. Let's see. Broly, Javi, Tyler. That seems kind of perfect, but what I am not going to do is an official raid, only because I know that there are not people of all ages watching, and I don't want to bring everybody to a stream that might contain profanities and cursing. But I will say, everybody, go and say hello to our boy Tyler. Let him know. He's painting right now. There's a lot of other people on, so I'm going to leave this one open for y'all to go ahead and raid whoever it is that you want to go and hang out with. I need to raid myself a sandwich and start winding down for the day. It was a very long day, so. But I absolutely love you all. Thank you so, so much for being here, and always remember, y'all, to go out and get everything that you set out to get, and don't let anything stop you. But take $0 to be a good person. So always do it through peace, love, and Pokemon. And thank you all for believing in ghosts. I really appreciate you all. I'll see you back here on Thursday. I might pop up a Rubik's Cube stream tomorrow or Wednesday, so be on the lookout for that. But really appreciate you all, and have a beautiful rest of your night.